Okay. So I'm going to cover MySQL for system administrators. I am a system administrator who pretends to be DBA on occasion, mostly when I'm on call. But I am still coming at this from a sysadmin perspective. If you want to see this from the other perspective, somebody who's looking at me here, Dave, is doing a presentation on Sunday, I believe. Similar type of talk, but he's an actual DBA, so you'll get the how DBAs look at system administration from his talk, I presume. So anyway, so I'll cover this tools that we're used to using and how we as sysadmins look at databases and things that can make our lives easier, even if we're not really into the depths of MySQL. So first, I'll give an example. This is cluster SSH. We wouldn't normally bringing up xterms, but it allows me to give a demonstration of something that I see on a regular basis, or I used to see on a regular basis. So this was just a command to go ahead and pull up 4 xterms and connect to 4 different databases. And if you look here, we have terminals of MySQL prompts all alike. So they all say MySQL. And once you get into it, you can't tell which database you're talking to, which host you're on, which database you're talking to, who you are. You don't have anything. Now, those of us from sysadmins, we have a solution for this, right? Oh, I forgot. Oh, yeah, the monotony of having everything look the same. So we have a solution for this. We know how to get around these problems. So we use PS1, right? Change our prompt to get it to have the data that we want to have. We can personalize it. I see people with like 4-line prompts. I think they're insane, but it works for them, right? So we can do what we want with it. But it won't work. Doesn't work for MySQL. PS1 doesn't work, neither does PS2. But they have something that does work. MySQL PS1. So if you change this variable in your environment, you can change what prompt you're getting within MySQL, so you can see which database you're on, who you are, etc., etc. And there's lots of other data you can put in there. I discovered while I was practicing this you can put timestamps in your prompt. I didn't like them, but you can put them in there. So here's an example of what I use, because I don't want timestamps. So I am getting the \U is the user, and an @ because we're all familiar with that, and then the host name. Now where I work, we have not so much on our MySQL boxes, but on other machines that we have a lot of machines that have the same names and just different pops. So I need to drop off the companyname.com, but leave the pop in place, and that's what the host name %.*.* is doing, is saying just drop the company.com off of there and leave the pop, so I can know where in the world I'm talking to. And then the \D is saying what database are we talking to. So when you use MySQL, use the information schema, use Fred's favorite database, whatever you're using, you can get that. And of course, we still have the greater than and a space, so we have good separation and everything on the prompt. So here's an example. Whoa. Well, we're done. All right. I thought I was talking fast. Well. All right. So here we have an example where we have root at MySQL, and then or root at machine name. So one of them happens to be MySQL. We also have. Got to put the glasses on so I can see scale 13x, tools, and Sonic. We'll get to that in a second. So we can see that I can at least tell who I am connected as and what machine I'm connected as. The next slide, I changed databases, so now we can also see which database I'm currently talking to. So we know where we are in the system when we're doing things. Because dropping a table in the wrong database kind of sucks and messes up your day. It's good for us to have context to where we are. And this has been, for me as a sysadmin, one of the biggest things to be able to get out of the MySQL environment was just to know where we are.
The font is kind of small. Will you make the slides available? The
slides will be available, yeah. With scale, we always put the slides up online, so I will be providing the slides. But yeah, sorry, the fonts are small because... All right. Now, in this case, cluster SSH was hitting 4 boxes in parallel, but I still needed 2 passwords in order to log in. So we can, again, we have sysadmins, we can take care of that. So I will leave the passwordless SSH as an exercise for home. The next thing was going to be a cool graphic of the open SSH, the home game, but as you might have noticed, I'm not so good at graphics, and my graphic guy didn't get the word in time, so sorry. Whoa! Wasn't even touching it. All right, where was I? All right. So how do we do authentication in MySQL? So you can use mysql-u, username-p, the password, and these are, the next list are things that kind of show why you wouldn't want to do that. Because your password ends up in your process list. So if you are doing that, especially if you have a long-running connection, other people can look at the process list on the machine and find out what your password is. And if you're connecting as root, which you generally shouldn't be doing, they now have root password to get into your, into the database. It also shows up in your shell history and also in your MySQL history. So you're also leaving that password in a couple places on the file system. And then finally, if you're copying and pasting, so you're doing documentation, something like that, you're now bleeding password information into your documentation as well. So we highly, highly discourage using the password on the command line because it's not quite broadcasting to the world, but you're trying. So now we can just call it without having a password there, and then it'll interactive ask you, hey, what's your password? Now at least it's hidden, but you're still having to authenticate, and if we're doing automated type of stuff, that doesn't work so well. So we'll cover some ways that you get through where we can have automatic authentication, and even more so from our perspective than necessarily automating things, but finding out how the devs automated things and where they're hiding passwords. So we can, for instance, make them go change them on a regular basis like they're supposed to and do other things for that. So automagic authentication. The tilde.my.cnf, you can set up a password in there, or actually username and password, and that can be used for authenticating. One that as sysadmins we should know, but I know from experience we tend to forget. There often is one of those in the root account, and that is then giving somebody root access again to your database, or usually that's what it's being used for. So when you're cleaning stuff up, look at your developer's home directories, but also look at the root's home directory in case somebody shoves something in there. And you might have an environment where that's perfectly fine, but as a sysadmin for the box, you want to know about these types of issues, especially if it's a security concern for you. Also, Debian throws a user for doing maintenance stuff in Etsy MySQL Debian.cnf, and you'll find that on Debian and Debian derivatives, so Debian, Ubuntu, etc. And it's useful, and it does some good things. Debian packaging does some nice things for upgrades. They'll dump the database and then do the upgrade and do some other stuff in there to protect you, which is nice. But they're using this mechanism, and again, if you've got an environment where you want to make sure you don't have unknown automatic processes, there's one of them. And then this is the last one is the thing I recommend for if you do need to automate something, because we have a little bit less bleed over. But the MySQL _ pwd is a variable, and if you set that to the password, then MySQL will try that. When you do the mysql-u username-p, it'll actually check that first for a password in order to authenticate. So you don't end up with it on your command line. You don't end up having to copy and paste password. You do a bunch of other things in there. Still not really, really secure, but as far as using it in a script, you now have it to where you've got less likely to be bleeding that information to somebody who's looking at your system. Now, granted, if you're talking, especially if you got DBAs working on it, you shouldn't have that many people wandering around your system. However, it happens. Also, especially for MySQL, we have a lot of systems that use MySQL that have it kind of embedded in their mechanism. So I'm on the DBA team. We control a couple hundred databases, or database servers and more databases, and we don't allow people to have access to those. But the monitoring tool we uses MySQL on all of the proxies throughout our network. So we have hundreds of MySQL systems embedded throughout our network for that type of mechanism. We have other tools that do the same thing, where we have hundreds, if not thousands, of MySQL instances that aren't under the DBA purview. So again, those are sysadmins taking care of those, not the DBAs. So I want to make sure they know how to keep their environments clean. Now, MySQL account limits, the top one just bothers me. You can only have 16-character usernames. It's hard-coded in the database. It's hard-coded in the clients. You know, if you're really, really good, you can mess up your database environment by trying to fix it. It's just something that's there. I just look at it as a reminder that the DBA is the ones that brought us Y2K. So, but it's annoying because I'm setting up accounts for applications, and I'd like to have a usable account name, something that tells me what application this is coming from, so that I can glance at my system and have kind of an idea what's going on. And instead, I end up with things that look like a hash because I'm running out of characters for stuff. So, all right, for authorization. So grants, I'll let you go look at the MySQL documentation for how to write a grant statement. But basically, if you're going to do read-only, you want to give them select. And if you're going to give them read-write, you need to give them select, delete, insert, and update. So that's also in the documentation, but again, it's sometimes it's a little hard to pull out. But with sysadmins, we like read-only access, especially if I'm giving them access to my slaves. Don't change things. All right, so we want to give them read-only access when we're doing that. So stored procedures. This is actually something I've found out recently because I don't really deal with stored procedures very much. But there's a parameter for when you're creating a stored procedure for SQL security, and you can set that to either definer or invoker. And basically, from us as a sysadmin's perspective, definer means whoever created the stored procedure is who it runs as, so it's kind of like a sudo. And then invoker is whoever is calling that. So whatever application is logging in and calling that particular stored procedure. Now, definer can be set when you create the stored procedure. So even though I create the stored procedure as root, I can say, hey, the guy that's really defining this is the application or whatever, the application account or something like that. So I don't have to have the application account's password because I have a hash, but I don't necessarily need to know what the actual password is. But as the super user on the database, I can go create a stored procedure for them, which is how we do it. We don't let our developers create stored procedures. We gate them a little bit before we put those things in place. So anyway, SQL security, if you're creating stored procedures, go look at that and make sure you understand what the implications are for definer invoker, and you're running as what you want to run as. Because if you don't, you end up with indexes that don't get updated because the person doesn't have access to add into the field that you wanted them to add into. Not that I've caused that recently. Backups are irrelevant. We don't matter, right? It's Restorals that matter. So, whatever tool you're using, it's how well you can restore that matters. How well you get all the data out is kind of irrelevant, because if you can't put it back in a mechanism that meets your company's needs, then it doesn't work for you. So, MySQLdump. This is an example of where Restorals matter. The last company I was at, we were using MySQLdump for our backups, and it took 3.5 days to restore the data. If our primary database had been down for 3.5 days, my company no longer existed, so kind of that Restoral didn't matter. So I had to come up with a different way, or find a different way to do backups, and I'll cover a couple of those in a second. However, we still use MySQLdump for schema dumps. Those go pretty quick. And it's good to have a pristine copy of your schema so that you can use that for backups, for reviewing. We use it for auditing so we can see if it's changed when it's not supposed to change, things like that. So the options for that are all databases, no data, and routines. Again, something I learned recently when we discovered that we weren't getting some backups to stored procedures. But as a sysadmin, we should care about timestamps. So when you do, make sure you're backing up mysql.proc, that table, and restoring from that in order to keep your timestamps. If you're using the MySQLdump, you will be getting the Restoral time on your stored procedure creation rather than when they were originally created. Now, at the last company, this is the tool I started using. Percona XtraBackup is a really cool tool. I now know a better way to do things. I've learned a better way, but it's still a cool tool just from a technology perspective. But it uses a lot of resources. It's a little slow. In fact, compared to what we're using now, it's a lot slow. But there are some environments where you have to have it. For instance, the environment I was in, we were using LVM, and I didn't have a way to put it in there. I couldn't use the mechanism we're using where I'm at now. If you've got a MySQL environment where you can't change things and you don't have LVM in place where you can do snapshots, look at XtraBackup. If all else fails, it's a way to get things going until you can rebuild your environment where you can use snapshots to get your backups. And one of the things that's just kind of really fun is XtraBackup basically crashes your database. It leaves it running, but it takes a crash dump of your database, keeps track of where you're at, and then restores back to a fixed point in time so that you have a consistent backup of your database, which is really awesome.
Mix of MyISOM and NoDB for XtraBackup, is it?
It'll work. That's what I had. We had mostly NoDB, but we had a couple things that were MyISOM. XtraBackup does the right things when you tell it to do the right things. So research in order to do that. Also, your internal tables are still MyISOM, and I'm not enough of a DBA. There are guys going to be up here later on. Ask them. I'm not enough of a DBA to know what the requirements are for backing up those tables properly. The innards of that. So I use tools that I can count on, and then I hope I don't have to worry. I also happen to have really good DBA that's on our team, so even if I mess up really bad, I've got somebody who will yell at me as he fixes it. So, all right. So snapshots. I wasn't touching it. Materialization takes a while, sorry. All right. All right, snapshots. All right. So put MySQL data on an LVM. Now, when I first learned about this, it just seemed not good because MySQL's the way it's writing to disk. It's not guaranteed to be consistent at any point, at least within a DB, with normal writing and so forth. So I was always worried about LVM. I was like, oh, okay, I can restore what I had, but if what I had on disk didn't work, it doesn't work for me. But I've learned more. One, as I say, I've got a DBA, a couple of DBAs are really good, so I've learned from them. So one thing, you still need to do a short-term read log. Go through and lock the database to keep anything from being able to change it. That gives you a chance to make sure that you've got a consistent backup. You can then do your backup using a snapshot. Now, we've got an in-house built tool for doing this because our team started doing this before I was at the company and before my LVM backup existed. Nowadays we have my LVM backup, so that's the thing. If you got greenfield, if you haven't got backups going, or if you're changing to this, go look at that tool and see if it'll take care of what you need. And it takes care of a lot of that. Again, as a sysadmin, we don't know the in and outs of databases necessarily, so let's learn from the people who do, who've created the tool. Same reason why we shouldn't write our own security algorithms. Let's use commonly used security algorithms that other people peer-reviewed, especially people who as a whole know more than we do. Log files. So there are a couple log files that we care about. The error log is where errors show up, right? So when you're monitoring, you should be looking at the error log and seeing if stuff comes in there. If you're getting things in the error log on a regular basis, figure out how to fix them so that you can start telling if there's something wrong because you get new errors in the error log. Because once you start the database up, the goal is that we're not getting things into the error log. Our environment is mostly that way, except we have some application developers that have that authentication issue causing problems. We yell at them and eventually they fix it. General log is if you're needing to look at everything that's going on in the database, or most everything that's going on in the database, you're trying to figure out what some of the long queries are, or who is failing to authenticate, you need to turn on the general log. With recent versions of MySQL, you can do that on the fly, so you don't have to restart the database in order to turn on the general log, but it logs a lot of data. So remember to turn it back off when you're done getting whatever data that you're wanting to get, because you will fill up your disks rather quickly on a busy database. So that's good, but you can turn it on, turn it off on the fly. And then the slow query log is a place where you can find queries that are slow, hence the name of it. But you can also find queries that aren't using indexes, and there's some other things you can do. Again, you can dial it in for what you want. What you count as slow query, if you've got a database that isn't used very often, that's not that important or something, maybe your slow query is a 20-minute query. Right? If you've got something that's doing transactions, you might want microseconds to determine what is a slow query. In our environment, we have both. Well, actually, anything that runs 20 minutes, we just kill. But if it's, our normal slow query would be a couple minutes. But on our transactionals that are needing to rip through a lot of data, a couple of microseconds are really, or not a couple, but microseconds are really the range we're looking at for our slow queries, especially if they're holding locks on tables that are then backing other stuff up. So querying data. Let's use the tools we know how to use. So now this is an important one, sonic screwdriver, but this is one that you can build different pieces. That's what we build pipelines. We have a bunch of small tools that do things. We know how to get them to slice and dice and do stuff. As a sysadmin, don't forget to leverage that. You might not know the SQL. Many of us have learned SQL over the years, and you might be able to be fairly proficient with SQL. But if you're not, don't let that hold you back. We have tools that do text manipulation, that do things. Use them. And MySQL has made it really easy to do that for years and years. It took me a long time to actually learn SQL because I didn't need to. So we have sed, grep, awk, Perl, Python, cut, sort, and unique, all these different tools. And by the way, sort is just so much easier to spell than order by. So we have tools that can do what we want. So MySQL will use the -E option. I'm leaving the authentication stuff off here to just shorten it. But -E says run this query. And so I can select whatever it is. And then rather than using a where clause, I can just pipe that to grep and grab what I want to do. Now, if that table happened to have 10 billion rows, that's not going to work very well, right? So in that case, you're going to want to use the database tools. But for a lot of things, if we as sysadmins are working on the table and we're trying to pull data out, we shouldn't be working on the big tables like that anyway, at least not until we've learned enough SQL in order to do so. But if we've got small databases where we're trying to figure out what's going on, or we're just making things on our own, that works perfectly fine. Now another one, this one is something that I found to be quite useful as a sysadmin. You have slaves that get out of sync or have problems, and MySQL show slave status is a great tool for figuring out what's going on, but it gives us a bunch of data that generally is just noise. It's hitting my screen. So instead I copy and paste this in, and I grep just the lines that I'm interested in. I want to find out if the slave IO is running. I want to find out if I'm behind the master and so forth. And I get rid of the other 40 lines that are line noise for me. So again, using the tools that we know. I know how to use grep. I could do that in an SQL statement, but it's really easy to do with the grep, and it's 60 lines, or like I say, 40 or so lines that you're going through to begin with. So it's not doing much. But if you are using MySQL command line, or the command line tool, you can also set your pager to be something else. So you can set it to less. So when you say show status, it'll give it to you a page at a time. So now you can use the DBA tool to do things. But you can also set it to a script or a grep, so you can go through and get the data you want within the MySQL environment. And there are times, again, where it's advantageous to do one or the other. I tend to be on the sysadmin side and just pipe it to grep and sed and awk and so forth. But you'll see that, especially if you work with DBAs, they will set the pager, so it's good to know what they're doing. And then this is an important one, and this was, I won't badmouth Postgres whatsoever. Postgres is a nice tool as well, but for the longest time, the Postgres command line tool did not have libreadline support, whereas MySQL did. And I was like, oh, this is awesome. I can use command line editing from within the MySQL command line tool. so I can go back and look at my previous statement and move over and edit and all the tools I use. I use VI so I can move back and forth. Using Emacs, you could use your Emacs command line editing as well, which for a sysadmin is awesome because we're used to doing that. We're used to reusing, and we're not as familiar with SQL probably, so we're also more likely to fat finger things and have to rerun things and fix our typos and so forth. So that makes it easy to do so. All right. Now I'm going to cover actually some database stuff. Hopefully this isn't a surprise for anybody in the data MySQL track. So first of all, we had a question about MyISAM. Honestly, from everything I know and learning from people who know a lot more than me, use InnoDB. If you're going through and creating a database, if you're creating an application, if you're setting up something new, use InnoDB unless you have a specific reason that you have to use MyISAM. And the developer going, I want to use MyISAM is not a specific reason to use MyISAM. So use InnoDB. It's a better database for us in just about every way. But don't change the internal tables. I mentioned, the other guys that are in here, they're going to talk later on. They can possibly talk to this about what's good and what's bad. But as far as I know, nobody does this. So your MySQL your MySQL database, your information schema database, your performance schema database, don't change those to InnoDB unless you really know what you're doing or you like living dangerous. And then when using InnoDB, for a small database, you can just use it how it comes out of the box. But if you're setting up especially a shared environment or database that's going to grow to significant size, use file per table, do it from the beginning, because going through and fixing it later on is a pain. What that does is says, for every database that you create, or every table that you create a different file on disk for that, instead of keeping it all in one stored file. And again, even if you just have one table growing, and that will slow down your other tables if they're all in the same file. So let's separate that out. And if you're really brave, you can even start putting those on different disks. So you can say this RAID is for that one big table, and I'll put everything else somewhere else. I haven't ever done that, but as a sysadmin, I'm like, I know it can work. So, and then another thing is, if you're doing maintenance, you need to shut down a database. It can take a while for MySQL to shut down. If you've got active connections going, active work going on, it can take a little while. So this last line, set global InnoDB underbar max, underbar dirty, underbar pages, underbar PCT. Some places they let us have long words, right? Set that to 0, and what that will do is it'll say clean up the cache, the InnoDB cache, so that we have less things pending, less things waiting. So that now when you do your shutdown, you've got less to write to the disk before it finishes the shutdown. And go look for that, because there's another command you can use to monitor how your dirty pages are. You won't get down, if it's a busy database, you won't get down to 0 dirty pages because you've got active stuff coming in. But once you get down pretty low, then you can do your shutdown. It'll take place pretty quick. Before I joined the database team, I was working on a rather large database, and that was not necessarily efficiently set up because I wasn't the database guy. It's much better now that they've helped out. But I would do a shutdown, and it would take 20 to 30 minutes to shut down the database because we had so much pending. Using this, I took 40 minutes to shut down, but it was running the whole time, so I didn't have an application outage while I was doing that. It's still, that database is still busy, so if we weren't using the 30 pages, it would still take a while to shut down. Not as long as it was under me, because, as I say, we've got smarter people working on it now, or more learned, I guess, anyway. Now, slaves. You should set up slaves for your data. If you care about your data, you should back it up, right? If you care, if you want your application to stay up, you should be setting up slaves so you can transfer to, you can use those if your primary goes down. You can use statement-based replication and row-based replication. Go read about those. In the end, you need to go read that page, go understand it, and look at the different pieces. I can't cover in the short period of time all the parts of it. At least I can't do it that quickly. Other people might be able to. But one piece with it is the statement-based replication was the original replication that was in place, but it doesn't handle non-deterministic queries very well. So if you do select random, And there are several queries that end up doing a select random. You might not realize that they're doing a select random, but there are several types of queries that do a select random type of thing. Those don't go over very well because you're now selecting random on your slave as well, which gets a different random set than on your master. So your slave starts diverging from where your master's at. Row-based replication will handle that, but you're slinging a lot more data across. Excuse me. So with row-based replication, you're saying, okay, when I said select random and I got these 50,000 lines that I'm going to change, I now send over the command that says change these 50,000 lines. But now instead of having one line command go to your slave, I now have 50,000 lines worth of data going to my slave. And if your slave is in a different data center on a not so great data connection or network connection, that doesn't necessarily work as well either. So go read the information on both those replications and what is happening in 5.6 and 5.7, where they're actually made some significant improvements. But it's one of those things where you need to go look at it if you're going to be responsible for maintaining that. Hopefully you've got a DBA who can walk you through that or make those decisions for you, and then their backside is on the line if it doesn't work so well. All right. Now we also use disaster recovery with corosync and DRBD. So we have, any place where we set up a database, we actually set up 4 machines. We have the master, which has an active master and a passive master, which are corosync and DRBD, and our slave also have active and passive. And what this allows us to do is we have, in order to move from the master to the slave, it takes a little bit of time to run that through, and we don't feel confident in doing that automatically. And based on a lot of talks I saw at Percona Live a couple years ago, lots of people don't feel comfortable automatically moving from master to slave. But with corosync and DRBD, if our master goes down, then the other machine turns on database, and DRBD is keeping the disk sync. So if that happens, then the other machine comes up and takes over, and there's a virtual IP going back and forth between the two of them. So we're not doing a master to slave failover. We're just saying, oh, the master rebooted much quicker than you were expecting because it's actually a different machine. So if you're doing that, don't use the normal init scripts. Like I mentioned that large database I worked on, yeah. Etsy init, MySQL restart, that did not work very well. So be cautious of the tools that you're using, and some of the things that we're used to as sysadmins might not work so well with databases. Monitoring. So the Percona monitoring plugins seem to be the common thing that everybody's using today. We're using an older version that turned into those. They work well with Nagios and Zabbix and Cacti. In fact, anyway, so we've got those. So they can plug into different environments, which is nice. So you can get things. They will pull in a lot of data from MySQL. Which is great. Our environment, we're monitoring hundreds of items on our databases so that we can graph and look at what's going on. We can be looking at things over time and get a visual representation of what's going on in the database. So anyway, so that's the pieces to look at. And one of these originated, or some of them originated with some scripts written by Baron Schwartz, who's doing the last talk this afternoon. So, come, if you like monitoring your databases, maybe thank him for that. But I know some of the other guys in the room have worked on that over time as well. Character sets. I don't know how the DBAs look at it, but as a sysadmin, just always specify the character set in MySQL. We ended up with a bunch of databases that were Swedish, which caused a few issues for us in production because they were sorting funny compared to what we were wanting. So make an active determination what character set you want, and make sure you set that when you're creating the database and when you're creating a table. Just get in the habit of doing that so that you don't get surprised. So community. So I'm not going to get into the full background, but we had MySQL AB that got bought by Sun, that got bought by Oracle, and who knows who Oracle's going to get bought by, because not anybody's really big enough to do that. But anyway, so we have some different pieces that go on. And especially when Sun bought MySQL IB, in the community there was some mistrust. When Oracle bought Sun and bought MySQL, there was a lot of mistrust because as a community we saw that is competing. Why would Oracle want MySQL to stick around and be free when they can charge for Oracle? So we already had other pieces in place. Percona had been around for a while, done some really good stuff. But as somebody who's not working for any of those companies, who's not involved in any of those projects, I see them as being working well with each other. Internally, for all I know, they've got knives out at conferences like this, right? I don't know. But from somebody who's on the outside, I've seen them working well together. They're staying, compatible. So Percona and MariaDB are doing a lot of work to stay compatible with MySQL. What MySQL is doing, I think of it as the Oracle fork, the Percona fork, the Maria fork. Dave might not like the first sentence I said there, but I see them working well together. So I don't see it as a versus. I see them as going through. Now they are individually trying to improve things and make theirs a little bit better, first, right? Fix the bug first or whatever. But they're still competing. But I see them as working fairly well together. And I also see Oracle stewardship as being having been good. I've learned at previous scales and also at Percona Live some of the things that Oracle's done. Dave gave a great presentation on MySQL 5.6 a couple years ago, and showing what Oracle been doing for improvements, and we see that in the database. So again, as somebody who's not in the middle of all that, who's not even really a full DBA, I've been happy with Oracle stewardship. I think they've done a good job of improving it, bringing things forward. Having competition probably helped drive that a little bit. That's the last piece I ever hear. Competitive cooperation. I think that is what free software does. Because if you've got a project and you've built it, you should know it the best. But if you're doing a bad job, somebody else can take over and start doing a better job and start competing, or provide a different service than what you're providing. So I think we've got that now in the MySQL community, especially with these three. And there's other derivatives and other pieces that go in there as well that help that. So I think we have competition, which is helping improve the tools for us. But I think that in the end, that also improves or brings in cooperation, so we keep together. Because if we end up forking and getting three completely divergent types of MySQL, that's going to hurt the community. So I'm hoping that they will listen to me and continue being compatible. And then some references. First of all, the other presenters in today's talk. We've got some really good presenters coming up. Excuse me. Some good topics coming up, so please go look at those. As I mentioned, Dave on Sunday is going to do this type of talk from, I'm presuming, a DBA's perspective. I'm interested in seeing what he has to say and how he corrects what I said today. The MySQL documentation, so mysql.com, the documentation up there is really good. It takes a little while to get used to some of the terminology. Any kind of new technology does that. But I found over the years it has been a great resource. And it is one of the places I've used to point out how, hey, in the free software world, we do have good documentation, and here's specific examples of that. The MySQL performance blog is great. There's a lot of pieces in there for helping us figure something out. You're trying to figure out how to do something. A lot of times you'll come into resources, descriptions there that help. It's a good piece to just go read on a regular basis. The Percona toolkit has a lot of extra tools, and especially for sysadmins, it's like, hey, I need to go do this, and I don't know all the intricacies of MySQL. Hey, there's this tool that does it for me, and we'll do it in a sane manner, or a mostly sane manner. And they give plenty of information in the man pages about, hey, be cautious about this and so forth. So that's a good resource for us, especially since, as I say, as non-DBAs, we might not know some of the intricacies we want to know. So let's use a tool where other people have, taken care of that for us. Now, this next one, TokuDB blog, this has to do with my personal experience. So I started a company where we were using TokuDB. They asked me during the interview, what do you know about TokuDB? And they had to repeat it 3 times before I figured out what they were saying. And I'd never heard of it, and I'd never used it. And so I got in, and we were using that. And I needed to figure out what the heck it was doing. So I started reading the blog, and their descriptions of what TokuDB is doing actually taught me a lot about what InnoDB is doing. Part of it's because they're like, well, we're doing it this way versus how other databases are doing it. And also about MyISAM. So I learned a lot from that. But if you're not using TokuDB, the MySQL Performance blog or the High Performance MySQL book are probably the better route to go. But I still found it useful. And it gave it from a slightly different perspective, which made more sense to me. And I don't know if that's just because I'm strange, or if it's because I'm a sysadmin, or because I was coming in not really knowing what I'm doing. But it worked for me, so I wanted to bring that up as well. Okay. Any questions? Yes, sir.
For the file per table setting that you discussed, I don't know if it was made clear. Can that be set up on a database that's already implemented, but still set up as INODB?
Yes. So if you've got a database where you've already set up, okay. The question is for the file per table setting for InnoDB, can you add that to a database that already exists? Yes, you can, but it won't affect any tables that already exist. It will only affect new tables. So if you've already got the big table, what you have to do is basically dump restore with the setting in place and rebuild it. So go look at the documentation for it, because it explains what's happening with the buffers and so forth. You can take care of it. It just takes a little bit of work. Yes, Jill?
The other good thing to note about file per table is it will let you vacuum out the tables. InnoDB will not automatically reclaim space if you delete a bunch of tables. So you would have to dump restore to reclaim that space, whereas with file per table, you can use some vacuum functions to reclaim some of that space.
Yeah, so her point was with the file per table, if you're using the one big buffer mechanism, it's the default, and you delete the large database, that buffer stays the same size. However, if you had separated those out to a different table, to different files, then when you delete them, the files go away and the space comes back.
I remember doing this once. If you set file per table and then you change an InnoDB's tables engine to InnoDB, it will rewrite it as a separate file.
That's one way of doing it, but you're again not reclaiming the space in your buffer.
No,
so that's
you're not reclaiming the space.
But you are
separating it out.
You can at least get a little bit of performance gain from that to begin with. Yes. So his comment was that if you've got if you set the file per table, then you can go through and basically say redeclare the table as InnoDB, even though it's already InnoDB, and that will get it to go through and create a new file. Yes.
MySQL integration, can we have MySQL as master and then MariaDB as the slave?
So the question was, can we have MySQL as a master and MariaDB as a slave? I have done that, and it works, but I don't know if it's smart. So part of it is look at your versions. So for instance, if you've got MySQL 5.6 as a master and MySQL 5.1 as a slave, danger. If you have MySQL 5.1 as a master and MySQL 5.6 as a slave, I believe that works just fine. So you start running into problems with that, where is MariaDB or Percona, where are they joining back up to the Oracle branch for MySQL? So you need to do compatibility stuff. There's also bug fixes. So for instance, for the TokuDB stuff, there was a fix, and I'm going to remember wrong anyway, so I won't say which one was which, but there was a bug in there that caused us significant problems for indexing, and well, not for indexing, excuse me, for auto increment, and it was fixed in either Percona or in Oracle version, and not in the other. And so if we'd have been mixing those in the wrong direction, we'd have been introducing bad data. As it turned out, we were using the one that didn't have the fix, so that we already introduced the bad data. But Right, any other questions? No? Well, oh,
So you'd mentioned that you were working with some really big databases, and you were discussing like the problem of restoring those. Were you finding that that Percona XtraBackup was handling that, or I mean, is that what's something you were doing with combination?
yes. So what happens is, okay, let me explain. So the question is, we were working with large databases and finding problems with restoring because of the time it took for MySQL dump to restore the data. So let me back up a little bit about what those do, as long as I have time, because I have no idea what time it is. But with MySQL dump, you've dumped all the data out into a file, and then you're basically rereading it in as SQL statements. So set user equal Fred, set all the data. You're doing them as statements, and it takes a while to do that, especially if you've got a lot of data. And as I said, in our particular case, it wasn't that big of a database, but it still took like 3.5 days to pull stuff in because of the amount of data that we had. And we didn't have the fastest machines, but they weren't Raspberry Pis either. They were decent boxes. So with what Percona XtraDB does is it does a crash dump of InnoDB, and then it restores everything to a point in time. So you basically get a copy of the database on disk, just like you'd shut it down. So now in order to reuse it, the amount of time it takes to restore from XtraBackup is the amount of time it takes to copy it to wherever you want the data. So if I still need to move 3 terabytes of data, it's going to take a little while to move 3 terabytes of data, but it's going to take a lot less time than putting those in one statement at a time. So that was the thing with it, because you end up with a copy of it. If you really, really need quick turnaround, you already have that 3 terabytes of data sitting on a box that you can turn up, and so you don't have to copy the data. You just start using that box instead of the box that just died, or the data center that just went away.
I'm sorry.
So anyway, and then the LVM snapshot is the same type of thing. So we get a snapshot of the file system. The advantage of the XtraBackup over the snapshots is the snapshots is doing the entire file system. So if I have 3 terabytes worth of data on a 5 terabyte system, or file system, I'm copying 5 terabytes worth of data instead of 3 terabytes of data. With the Percona XtraBackup, I'm just moving 3 terabytes of data. But there are other things where, one, I'm not taxing a database server near as bad in order to do the snapshots. So, and your follow-up?
Well, and then on the other end of the spectrum, real granular restoration. Were you finding that was a useful tool for that, or?
What do you mean by granular?
It was one table restore.
With Percona, you have to do a full restore. So if you want to do, if you need partial, one database out of many, there's actually a script that's there that you can use to essentially spin up an extra database instance, looking at the Percona data directory. Then you speed it ahead to the point where the snapshot is taken. Then you do a dump from there. So for partials, it's not really that great. I mean, it takes some work to.
Okay. So the question was, if you wanted to just restore one table or one database from everything that was done with Percona XtraBackup, basically you have to spin up the backup somewhere and then dump the piece you want and restore it back to where you want. So you're doing that part the long way.
Well, XtraBackup supports partial backups from what I remember.
It was. I hadn't used this particular thing, but it was. As I understood it, it understood. I'm forgetting the word. Differences. So you could have a backup on Tuesday and then get just the things that changed since Tuesday type of thing. But I don't. Does it support? Does anybody know? Does it support just doing one database or one table? I haven't used it for 3 years now. So okay. So he's saying it does. So don't listen to what I said. But no, go look. I mean, any tool you're going to use, go look at the documentation. But that's a very good question and an important piece to keep in mind. Because if I have a 3 terabyte system, but really it's that 100 meg file, database that makes me money, that's the one I care about. And maybe I back that one up separately. You were going to add?
Another tool to look at, because Percona also requires installing extra tools in your environment. Rackspace released something called Holland Backup, which uses the existing MySQL providers like MySQLdump or LVM Snapshots, but it makes it a little easier to script incremental backups, single table backups. It's a little more accessible than writing 100 MySQLdump statements. It's called Holland Backup, like the country, and it's Rackspace has produced it, so you can pick Rackspace Holland Backup.
So she's saying that Rackspace has created a tool called Holland Backup that is similar to
It's a little
extra
friendlier
backup,
to systems.
but it doesn't need as many extra tools on it to do the same thing. Okay? Yes, sir?
Is there a specific file system format that you would suggest for running your databases?
So we run our databases on XFS. So you want something that has big support. One thing to remember to add, which I taught the database guys about this, was InnoDB 64. Actually, somebody in Ops clued me into that one night when we were having some problems. So the people who are knee-deep in it every day run into these things, right? So somebody in our Ops support pointed that out, and we've been throwing that in place. You can also turn off your timestamp updates and things like that to reduce how many writes you're doing to the disk. And I don't remember specifics for why we moved off of ext4, but XFS has better big table support, big file support, and in general, other than there was a regression for a little while, has been in good shape.
You can also do better LVM snapshotting stuff because it has its own built-in.
Yeah, so XFS has some stuff for LVM snapshotting. There's also, though, with XFS, there is a freeze piece, and this is one of the regressions we ran into. I forget what the exact is, but something about freeze, and that was not getting kicked off automatically like it was supposed to. So our scripts determine which version of XFS, set the freeze, do the snapshot, unset the freeze by hand. And if you don't, you end up with scrambled eggs. So figure that out. And I think that was specific to Ubuntu 10.04, and it's been fixed for a while. So it might not be an issue for us nowadays. So, any other questions, comments? Well, thank you. Stay for the rest of the day and figure out how to do the real things.